So here we are in this interesting passage full of difficulty and pain and prejudice and misunderstanding and hurt and jail and all the things. And so it challenges our understanding of what it means for things to be legal or illegal, right? It challenges what it means for us to see a God who not only is challenging people to free other people, but that sometimes in those moments, that freedom is not wanted by those who actually gain things from people not being free, right? Whether it's they're a slave, whether it's they're in jail. And so I found this quote recently very apropos to this. Apartheid was legal. The Holocaust was legal. Slavery was legal. Jim Crow was legal. Colonialism was legal. Legality is a matter of power, oftentimes not justice. Legality sometimes is a matter of power and not justice. I mean, again, we take this story. It was legal for this woman to be mistreated in this way, to be used for the gain of the people that held her. She was treated as a thing and not a person. She wasn't given dignity, but seen as just dollar signs. It was legal how they exploited her. But who goes to jail in this story? Say it out loud. Paul and Silas, right? The ones who set her free go to jail. Paul and Silas set her free, and then they are congratulated by the community? No. They are mistreated. They're flogged, which is an old ancient word for beaten, right? They were mistreated. They weren't just handcuffed and put in jail. They were abused, hurt, physically and mentally, I would imagine. Very scary. And I don't want us to gloss over this or say, well, it just happened thousands of years ago, because I think we can all agree, if we look around at the news and at videos that we find on whether it's TikTok or whatever, that it happens all over the world today, even in our own country. And we need to reckon as Christians, people of faith, with unjust laws that dehumanize others and what it means to struggle against those laws, because more often than not, the struggle against those laws will cause us to feel unsafe. And more often than not, the ones in jail are sometimes, if you've heard the stories, feeding the homeless, right? There's churches that feed the homeless and go to jail, right? Because they're doing something they're not supposed to do. Or advocating for victims, or trying to stand up against the latest, which is ICE agents, right? Like doing the things that actually help us to understand the human value of people sometimes goes awry. In some ways, it's all backwards. Thousands of years ago and also today. I can imagine most of you are like me. I'm going to say it. If you've had run-ins with the law, right? It was very minor, and the system probably treated you pretty well. Might get head nods? Yeah. One time I was driving around Texas, in Dallas, and you know Texas police don't mess around. And I'd gotten my new car, a lease, and I had not driven it at night. I just had moved there. And it was the first time I ever had a car that actually, it had automatic lights for it to be at night, right? The lights just flip on and off. Do you ever remember when you had to actually get in your car and go, lights on? Who remembers that? Yeah. So that was my world. And so I thought I'd done that, but it turns out I hadn't. So I'm driving around with my lights off, which is very dangerous. And I get pulled over, and I'm like shaking, because I'm like, yes, officer. You know, I'm someone who just follow the rules, do the rules. I remember when I got in an accident once, and the police came to me, and I said, I'm so sorry. And he was like, it was an accident. Calm down, you know. Things happen. So the guy pulls me over, and he's very Southern, and he goes, ma'am, is this a new car? And I said, yes, officer. And he said, well, your lights weren't on. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. And he goes, well, I just want you to be safe. So you turn those lights on, and I didn't get a ticket. And also, you can imagine that if I'd looked different, that may have turned out a little bit different, right? As you are probably aware that not everyone's experience with the judicial system, the systems of our world, whether it's in our country or other countries, we don't all have the same experiences. Because as I said at the beginning, legality is an interesting term. Lots of things in the history of our world have been legal or acceptable to society that we would now deem as terrible things, right? And so it's not that we're lawless, but that we need to be people who think about justice and not dehumanizing people with the laws that we create and embolden. Again, currently we are hearing an uptick in the word illegals, right? So we're actually deeming people legal or illegal. And sometimes we understand that it's complex to have people coming into a country, ours or someone else's, that isn't from our country, whether they're a refugee, whether they're coming legally, whether they're, leaving something or coming to something. And I guess I want this passage to challenge all of us to the idea of legality through the experiences of the early church and this Roman law that they are up against. I want you to think about the next time you hear someone, a human being, called illegal, what I want you instead to think is, oh, that person doesn't have power. That person doesn't have power, right? Paul and Silas at the beginning are someone that they do something to what are apparently two men or a few men that are big in the community who are making money off of this terrible exploitation. But who has the power? At the beginning, not Paul and Silas. And so they go to jail, not because they did anything wrong, legally, but because they went up against the status quo. And because they were easy to arrest, right? Because for centuries, in our own history and other histories, exploitation has been legal. Again, I'm going to be preaching from the text each week with an inspiration for the book Fully Alive, Tending to the Soul in Turbulent Times. And so we'll journey through a reframing of the 7 deadly sins. I know that doesn't sound fun or summary, but trust me, right? And we begin with a concept the author introduces from a professor of hers, and it is called the human propensity to F things up, or to I'll never say the word, trust me, mess things up. The human propensity to mess things up is what we're all living in. Can I get an agreement that you see that around you, that you acknowledge yourself messing up, right? Because you can imagine the history of the church really has gotten sin wrong in so many ways. I mean, there are probably more responses of those sitting here when I say we're going through the 7 deadly sins. I know a few of you are like, oh, that's icky. That feels judgy and icky, right? Is that some of you? Like, oh, that's weird. And at least a few of you are like, go, Pastor, go. You talk about those sinners. Sin, right? So a pastoral interaction that was online recently went like this. A congregant came up to the pastor after the service, as some of you do, and said, Pastor, why don't you preach more on sin? And the pastor said, well, what is your sin so that I can preach on it for you? And the congregant said, no, not my sin, other people's sin. And the pastor said, why would you want me to preach about someone else's sin? But you get what's going with that, right? And so I think what I mean when we say sin, I want us to all understand what I'm saying. And the author writes it this way, and I think it's very succinct. She says, sin, theologically understood, has nothing to do with enjoying sensual pleasure, the way that we have seen sin. It's not an individualistic thing alone. Sin is a relational concept about the threads between us and others, and how the natural world, the unnatural world, God's world, and us all connect or disconnect. Sin is disconnection. Sin is simply disconnection. We've disconnected from ourselves. We've hurt someone, so we've disconnected from them. We've done something against God. We've disconnected from God. We've done something against God's created world. We've sinned against that. So sin is an entirely relational concept of disconnection. So we like to say that sin will send that person to the place we don't like to name. And I've been told that anytime a pastor talks about pride or whatever, or even just as a woman pastor, as you know, last week I said I've gotten a lot of interesting comments online. I was called a toe-shaped harpy. Did I mention that last week? And I looked up a toe-shaped harpy. I was going to put a picture of it. Very, very interesting bird. I'll mind it. I'm like, woo, the bird is like, hello, I'm right here with you. And I'm like, that's kind of me. It's fine. I don't know what toe-shaped means, but, we can get into that later. Sin is simply the acknowledgement that we have a tendency as humans to mess things up. Wouldn't you say that's right? We have a tendency, not all the time, but sometimes. Immanuel Kant said this: the crooked timber of humanity is what we see. The crooked timber of humanity is what we see and we live in. So sin isn't outside of us or in the other, as we like to think of it. Sin, rather, is, I like to think of it as our own bundle of unhealthy and self-destructive behaviors we use to cope with a world out of control. And I think that's why, with the tagline of the book saying, tending to the soul in turbulent times, I think when turbulent times come, what we want to do is maybe escape somewhere, pretend life is great, but instead what she says is we actually need to go back and take a harder look at ourselves. How are we responding in turbulent times? I often say that this world would be so much better off if our leaders healed themselves. Sometimes I think leaders or people we see in the world, someone that gets angry at you for no reason, you know that when someone, I heard this recently on a podcast, if there's an interaction, there's a disconnect from you and someone else, and it's something small, but they're raising their voice to a level 5. You guys heard that before? Like you drop something and they're like, "Rah!" It's not about the thing. If someone responds overly emotional for that moment, it's not about that moment. We need to heal ourselves. Instead, we need to think through, we want to live in a country where we care for one another, where things are legal or illegal, and we monitor that as well, but we don't use dehumanizing terms for people. We don't dehumanize for profit. I want to live in a world where transgender folks aren't treated badly when they want to exist. I want to live in a world where women can do what they want and have equality and equity. I want to live in a world where we take care of the least, the lost, and the eldest in our community. I want us all, in fact, to be free. Now, sometimes when you hear the word "I'm free," we think I'm free from systems. And the truth is, you're never free from systems. I think sometimes freedom looks like tinfoil hat conspiracies kind of free. Like, I'm not in the system, but I believe this crazy thing is actually the truth of what happened. No, I want to be free in the ways in which I can naturally disconnect from the world to protect myself at all costs. I want to be reconnected to the world. Sin slows us down. It ensnares us. That's the visual of it. It lies about our worth and the worth of other people. It feeds off our worst tendencies to be selfish and uncaring. That's what sin is. Sin isn't the thing in someone else that we all agree on. The sin is the thing in us. So this concept of being fully alive is truly simply about reconnection. We need to be connected in the right ways with the right people and the right things. And freedom is, in fact, meeting our worst tendencies with grace and meeting other people's worst tendencies with mercy and empathy. I'm going to say that again. Freedom is meeting our own worst tendencies with grace and meeting the worst tendencies of other people with mercy and empathy. Now, that doesn't mean if someone mistreats you that you just give them access, right? Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean you stay in relationship with them, but forgiveness is the thing that catapults freedom because it releases us from that person. Have you ever met someone who had a grudge for 10 years? Have you ever met someone who has a grudge for a long time? Raise your hand. Has anyone ever met someone that had is that person free? No. That person is still attached to that thing or situation or that bad thing, right? I think we in our society need more forgiveness and empathy and less anger and judgment. And I think that will truly set us free. Again, now that doesn't mean people shouldn't be held accountable, but we simply don't have to carry the weight of what they did. That's theirs to carry. If someone did something terrible, that is their weight to carry. Let it go. And so one of the effects of society that doesn't talk about sin, which we don't a lot as individuals or as groups, is that we also live in a time where accountability isn't happening either. Do you notice that? Someone can get upset and you can say, so here's how you hurt me or here's where you're wrong. And what does that person do 9 times out of 10? Gets defensive and doesn't even hold themselves accountable to it at all, right? That's not freedom because they're going to hang on to that. We can't control other people. And I say this a lot from the pulpit. We can't control other people. You can't control other people. And I say that as a person who wishes I could make everyone do these good things for each other, and I can't. I can't. I mean, we need to let those things go. We can't control what people say or what they do. How angry and bitter and resentful do we want to be? Isn't life too short to carry those things around? So what happens in the story of Paul and Silas is that after they are jailed, mistreated, they don't give up on God. They don't give up on God. Something bad happened, and notice that God doesn't swoop in and keep them from going to jail. That's sort of what I would want to see. Is everyone with me? Like if I was Paul and Silas and I went somewhere and I was like, I freed this woman. This is such a God thing. Oh my gosh, God is so going to reward. Why is that guy coming at me with a club? I wouldn't know why. I wouldn't know why. But they weren't spared that. But still inside their jail cell, they knew that what they were doing was the gospel of Jesus. It was so important to them that they kept on praising and singing. And so what happens? An earthquake. An earthquake happens, and they're freed. But what they do next, I think, is the moral of the story for all of us. What they do next is truly extraordinary. They don't punish the jailer. I mean, he's about to kill himself. You understand that in Roman law, if you're a soldier and you do something wrong, they don't write it up on your report. Right? You're all with me? They don't write it up on a report. They don't put something in your file. No, if you do something wrong as a soldier, you probably should not exist anymore. It's basically what he's saying. There's no job review for them, right? It's a brutal world they live in. And Paul and Silas could have let him do that. How easy would it have been to see the person that hurt and jailed them for no good reason do something harmful? How many people do we know that would be like, well, justice, you know? No. He becomes saved. The jailer ends up believing in Jesus, believing in the gospel. Not because of the theology of Paul and Silas, but because of the commitment Paul and Silas had to a way of life that was forgiving, empathetic, compassionate, and caring. The jailer believes after this interaction. Imagine that. Imagine all that's gone down. We tend to gloss over these things in Scripture, right? Fancy words and whatnot, but this would have been a brutal night for Paul and Silas. In a vindictive society, they weren't vindictive. And that was so powerful of a witness that the person that did the harm to them was saved. Because he had to face God. He had to face God in that moment. And you know that because he tended to the wounds, he repented and felt sorry, and then his family was baptized. So Paul and Silas's forgiveness led the jailer and his family to be even more deeply connected with God and others. So you're seeing the cycle that can happen, right? We do something amazing, free someone, it's amazing. We are put in jail, we are mistreated. And we have a moment of clarity where we can choose how we respond next. Do you see how the cycle of violence and retribution can continue on and on and on? But Paul and Silas break that cycle and say, we want to leave, but we didn't. We don't want you to be hurt. But here, let me tell you why. Because the God of compassion that we met through Christ compels us to not only free the slave, but to free you, jailer, to free you from that cycle of violence. And so, as we enter into this summer, I want us to be equipped to understand what it means to live in a world full of contradictions and difficulties where terms like legality and illegality are sometimes misused. What does it mean for us as Christians to be free and also to be people who free others? So my prayer and my hope is that you will experience that freedom for yourself and that you will be someone who gives away forgiveness and empathy and compassion in all the ways that you've experienced it with God. May it be so. Amen.